All right, John, thanks for making the time to join us today. So it is said the current budget is less than last year's $75.1 billion on paper, but when you include the Medicaid provider tax revenue, that number gets pushed up to near $84 billion. Can you explain to the audience the difference between this year and last year's total and kind of why this Medicaid provider tax revenue gets added sort of after the fact? I think it's confusing to some people.
Oh, absolutely, it's confusing. It's unfortunate that that is the way it is, and I believe we are codifying what the feds are telling us what to do. We're going in concert with them. It is a little confusing. The provider tax, one problem why it's not in the budget is that it is not guaranteed to happen every year. You could have congressional action that changes it. So it's hard to put it in the budget permanently, not knowing what might happen in the future. So really, we got to work on the things that are in the budget every year consistently, and then kind of work around this provider tax part. It's still a lower budget than last year, and that's the main thing I think we're thrilled with. And we didn't raise taxes, and we didn't raid the rainy day fund, which the Senate wanted to do. So I feel really good that we didn't do that, and hopefully we're sound enough to continue into next year's budgeting.
And so that Medicaid provider tax revenue, is that money that is coming out of revenue generated by the state in this upcoming fiscal year, or is that money the state already has in some sort of fund?
It's restricted funds by the providers have to pay that to receive their Medicaid funding. So it is actually a separate thing when it comes to budgeting.
Sure.
It is strange, but we gotta account for it in a different way, just to make sure that there's no problem in the future.
Before our conversation here, John told the audience that $125 million in earmarks were approved. Did you get any funding specifically for your district?
Not exactly just for my district. I did get a reapportioned piece that was from last year's budget. That was just because there was a name change. I got that reallocated, but not particularly just for my district. One of the things that we provided in the DHH budget, human services part that I am in charge of as the chair, was a fund to help our private providers out there that are taking children from the state, causing damage, and there's no recourse for these private facilities to get any kind of help from the state. So we did put in a fund that will help these providers take care of any damage that's done by state-allocated kids. So that's a big one for the providers, and I feel pretty good about that.
Do you happen to know, is there any money in any of those earmarks that are coming to northern Michigan? I'm not going to get into the weeds of all of the earmarks, but there was several $1 million in projects, of course, in southern Michigan for museums and for safety and security for a Jewish facility, I believe a temple down in southeast Michigan. How much money is coming to northern Michigan in those earmarks?
I don't know if I have the exact dollar figure yet. I'm still working through that. Unfortunately, what I did see was only about 3 projects from Clare to the bridge that are in northern Michigan. There are a few handful in the UP. I think it was around 8 total north of Clare, which is that's concerning because more and more people are moving to the north. More and more of our small communities, tourist areas, need the help with infrastructure, and we didn't get that, and that's something we have to work on in the future.
Property tax reform, that was a major focal point for Speaker Matt Hall and House Republicans at large. Did any reforms get passed, or was that largely negotiated out of the budget?
Yeah, it was not passed this time. Unfortunately, it's something we hear at the doors all the time, and people tell me no matter where I'm at, whether I'm at a door or at a local business, that they need to see some relief, and it was something we definitely wanted to do. But with the working with the Senate and the governor, it just didn't work out in this time. But those talks will continue.
Celebrated by both parties, generally speaking, it was the increase in per pupil funding. According to my research, in the past 15 years, per pupil funding has increased in 12 of those years by varying amounts, some more than others. Some argue that it is needed to keep up with the rate of inflation and that it takes time for increased funding to provide positive effects in education outcomes. Others worry after this many years with weak performance from Michigan schools that it can be viewed as a waste. In your opinion, how long should taxpayers continue to boost education funding without notable gains in performance and education outcomes before a change in fiscal policy is taken? And do you think that the education budget should be tied to performance?
Absolutely. I think accountability for our schools is very important. I will add two things that we did work on. Teaching teachers to teach the right way to teach kids learning or reading skills. We put money into that this year since we are in the 44th, the 45th part of the country and that score. We did put money into those areas and dyslexia so that kids can help learn. I will say there's a big discussion about keeping the school aid harmless from different things that we do in the budget. It was about a $2 billion increase over the last couple of years, and losing kids out of the public school system at maybe 10,000 kids a year is a tremendous concern. We've continued to restrict funds, so it's hard for us to move them around. It's something that is being talked about today. We need to look at that. Every time we do a new thing like road funding, that we had to hold the education funding harmless. We got to stop doing that. We need to look at this. It is a concern going forward. And I right with parents, and I'm obviously a parent of a couple daughters that graduated a few years ago. I am concerned by the scores that we get and be hesitant to get it done. And I was surprised the governor came out with this year's budget finally saying we need to improve reading scores. 7.5 years into her term, it seems a little off base and maybe a little late. But we did put money in to actually teach kids how to learn or how to read. And that was a big push that for our caucus this year. So feel good about that, but there are some overall funding conversations that need to be had going forward.
Yeah, John, I'm not expecting necessarily, a solution to something that's been a topic of conversation for the past couple of years, obviously. But it's something that even came to my mind as I was preparing for our conversation, because it was a conversation that was being had at a dinner table that I was at a couple of days ago, and just kind of general confusion of, okay, reading has been reading for decades. People have learned to read for decades at this point. Math is math, and there's a right answer and there's a wrong answer, and there can be some varying differences in the way maybe some of the humanities are taught, but and of course history, there's always a couple more years to add on as we go year and year making history every single day. But largely speaking, things don't change, and so it's confusing to a lot of people why there is a difficulty and why scores have dropped over the past 10, 15, 20 years so dramatically, when especially when really just focusing on reading, when that really hasn't changed.
Right. The teaching has. That's part of the problem, Nick, is that instead of phonics, where you learn to sound out words and as you read along, they've tried to make kids just understand what the word was. So instead of trying to sound it out by syllables, they just say, okay, this is cat. Say cat. Don't say cat. And so they got away from that. And now you got places like Mississippi that is now starting to climb with reading scores. There's a little town in Steubenville, Ohio, probably the poorest district in the state of Ohio, who has some of the highest reading scores in the country. This is because they dove into the phonics end of things again and sounding out words and learning how to read, and it's made their scores go way up. So it can be done, and that's the model we're trying to follow now.
House Republicans had proposed cutting higher education funding, primarily for U of M and MSU, by as much as 27%. That funding actually got boosted by 1%. What happened there? Was it something that House Republicans decided to negotiate with Democrats in order to get something that you folks wanted?
Yes, absolutely. There were things in boilerplate in particular we were able to get. We got rid of a a DEI, or you could say implicit bias training that the Democrat Senate wanted every school board in the state of Michigan to learn and deal and adopt. We got rid of that. So there were some things that we were able to negotiate and get it out of the budget and use that as a leverage. We knew that the cuts to like U of M and Michigan State weren't going to be that severe. But if we can keep it lower and get some good wins, that is definitely always something that we're willing to work with. Because obviously the endowments at these major universities are quite large now. I know it's restricted in how they can use them, but they need to start looking at that when they're using it for capital outlay and that kind of thing. So there is leverage and negotiations that we can do to try and get some things that we want. I think boilerplate-wise, and that's obviously how the money has to be spent inside these budgets, we had some good wins there, and I think we feel pretty good about that.
Yeah, and I know I've been asking you about things that may have not gone House Republicans' way, but were there notable things that you guys were able to negotiate out of the budget that Democrats wanted? I know you just mentioned one, but I remember talking to State Senator DeMoose a few years ago, and he said that, people tend to focus on what's in the budget, but what we fought to keep out of the budget is nearly equally important. So anything come to mind?
Yeah, work projects is one that we always talk about. Work projects are basically when the money is not expended at the end of the year, the departments come back to us and ask us to put it in a work project where they can spend that money over a 4-year period going forward and change slightly how that money can be used. So we were able to really limit the work project conversation. They have to be approved by us, and we have eliminated a lot of that. And the other thing that we did as part of the budget is make them spend the actual spending. So many times they ask for, let's say, $2 million, and they only spend $1.5 million. They take that $500,000 and put it forward and lapse it into their funds inside the department where they can use it different ways. We cut all that down to actual spending. That's part of why we got that lower number, was to say, what did you spend the last couple of years? That's what you're going to spend going forward. So I think that was a big win for folks, and keeping the taxes out of there, the new taxes, and also not dipping into that rainy day fund that we want to keep whole.
The budget eliminates a $20 million federal funding allocation to RX Kids, the Cash for Moms program that House Republicans had been critical of. Does that mean the program is now defunct? Because I haven't seen reporting on saying that it's defunct, or it said federal funding's been eliminated. Does that mean there's state funding that's still going towards this program? Yeah.
To a lot of us, not necessarily, I'm not going to get into whether you hate or like RX Kids. What I would say, there's not a lot of guardrails on it. That was a lot of our concern as Republicans. What can you spend the money on? What are the qualifications for the mothers? Those kind of things are really where we've looked critically on the program. The removing of the $20 million of TANF federal funding just means it takes it out of the budget. Unfortunately, they had a 3-year program and a work project last year, so there'll be about $70 to $90 million for the next 2 years going forward that RX Kids will have. So it's not gone yet, but what will happen in 3 years is they will have to renegotiate with us in the budget again. So it's out of the budget per se, but it's now work projects. So it's not dead, but it's something that we can negotiate and talk about a lot more when that work project's done. So I think it's 29 budget. They'll have to come back and renegotiate how that program works.
Understood. The Pure Michigan budget got cut again, according to Crane. It was $30 million last year, $16 million this year, and $9 million in this recently passed budget. A two-part question for you, if you will. This is not the first time this budget has been cut, as we just went through. Do lawmakers think that it's being increasingly unnecessary, some sort of relic of the past? And at this rate, is Pure Michigan on the path of being eliminated entirely in a few years?
Boy, I sure hope not. Up north, the Northern Caucus members, there's about 18 of us. We know how important it is to Northern Michigan. Unfortunately, we lost out to, again, Southern Michigan. This is always a disappointment for the Northern Caucus group. We find that very important. Now, it's $9 million, but it's also a $2 million fund for special events. So if you had a major PGA event in northern Michigan, you could apply for that extra $2 million.
Gotcha.
So it's not totally down to 9, but it's still concerning from the northern Michigan end of things. We kept the budget low. We made sure no new taxes, but northern Michigan still in this budget, I think, we can say that we want to work harder at next year's budget, getting more up north. The infrastructure part, again, is still so critical for northern Michigan.
Yeah, and I think I agree, John, that Pure Michigan does seem to benefit northern Michigan a little bit more, even though they do try to balance out their advertising and where, Pure Michigan advertisements are, what they're talking about. But did they say why they cut this? Was this simply that, this money needs to go somewhere else? Or do they just not value Pure Michigan in the way that they used to?
No, I think the speaker in particular, we've had these conversations with the Northern Caucus and the speaker that he understands it's very important to us. I think it was more about just balancing out this budget, and that one of the two big things that we really had to work on, and we did do a good job at, was the new Medicaid changes and the new SNAP benefits. That's where some of that money had to go to make sure that's shored up going forward with the different cuts that were done at the federal level. We had to make sure that was solid. And unfortunately, the DHHS did well, but some of our other parts, like Pure Michigan, did not. So we'll see how this year goes and see what kind of changes we have to make going into next year for the 28 budget.
Yep.
But I think it's something we got to do and look at. But unfortunately, it was balancing the whole thing out is why Pure Michigan took a cut.
Anything else from the budget that we haven't talked about that you would like to highlight before we wrap up?
We still got some employees gone, too. So that was, I think we felt pretty good. There were still 250 employees that were funded but unfilled that we were able to eliminate out of the budget and say, come back to us next year. We're not going to just fund these positions that aren't filled. So they did have to have a few more employees in DHHS for the redetermination for SNAP and Medicaid, but we were able to get sort of some of those employees that just are not filled yet. So that was another good win, I think, in our eyes.
We're speaking with State Representative John Roth, a Republican from Interlochen. And John, always appreciate the time and insight.
Thank you, Nick. Have a great day.